And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. And she wrapped him in cloths, and she laid him in a manger, for there was no room for them in the inn. God had a messy plan. That plan was a plan that was going to save the world, but it was going to require giving of his son. So where would the God of the universe choose to send his son? Where would the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords choose to come? Not to a palace, not to a throne, not to a super well-equipped hospital room, but to a stable, to a manger, to an animal pen. Certainly not a place fit for a king, but this was no ordinary king. See, when I say that it was a messy plan, well, I mean it was messy. Where you have animals, you also have animal stuff. Poop, mud, all of it. This is no place for any child to be born, any human being, much less for the King of Kings. And yet this is where he chose to come. It's not the place I would have chosen. If I was the God, if I was the king, it's not the place I would have chosen to send my son. But it's what he chose. It's where he sent him for us. The question becomes, why? See, Isaiah tells us that our ways are not his ways, and our thoughts are not his thoughts. And some 400 years before Jesus was born, that same prophet Isaiah told us that all of us are like sheep, or we'll say goats, and we have gone astray. All of us have chosen to go our own ways, and the Lord has laid our iniquities on him. Sheep need a shepherd. And what a shepherd does is a shepherd cares for his sheep. A shepherd prepares a way for his sheep to find their way back home. A shepherd lives where the sheep live. He sleeps where the sheep sleep. And he eats where the sheep eat. And while walking on the earth and as he grew, that got Jesus in a lot of trouble. Eating where his sheep ate. Eating with the sinners. But he did it because that's what a shepherd does. And speaking of shepherds, on that night, on that time when Jesus was born, the angel came to some shepherds. Of all people, came to some shepherds sitting out in a field and told them, "This will be a sign for you. A baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And I don't know about you, but I've read that passage over and over in my life, and I don't know that I've ever stopped to ask the question, what sign? What was this baby a sign for? Because a sign points to something. A sign says, this is important, pay attention. So he was telling these shepherds, this baby that you're going to see, pay attention, for this baby is important, but what is that baby pointing towards? What is that sign pointing towards? Well, maybe that sign was telling us that God, the God of the universe, the God who created all of this, that God is accessible to everybody. That the God of the universe, the God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, can still relate to the person who owns nothing, can relate to the person born in the lowliest of circumstances or in the highest and most lofty of places. A shepherd or this king can relate to those who don't know where their next meal is going to come from, can relate to those who don't know where they're going to sleep that night. For Jesus told us when he got older, he told us that the foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Maybe it was a sign that was pointing us to the reality that God doesn't care about the social statuses of men. He doesn't care if you are at the top of the food chain or if you are at the very bottom. If you are the boss or you are the lowest paid employee, status doesn't matter to this king. Or maybe it was a sign that was pointing us to the reality that the splendor, the wealth, the possessions of men are worthless to God because they're just not worthy of him. Maybe the sign was pointing to all of those things, but I can be pretty confident that the sign was pointing us to do likewise. The sign was pointing us to follow the example of this king who was born in such lowly circumstances. The Apostle Paul would later write to the church in Philippi, he says that we should have the very same attitude as Jesus Christ, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead made himself nothing, becoming a servant and taking on human likeness. Servanthood is messy. Becoming a servant like Jesus became a servant is not clean and neat. Servanthood means getting into the animal pen and cleaning up the muck and the mess. Or to follow his example more exactly, servanthood means getting down on your knees and dipping your hands into filthy, dirty water so that you can wash the feet of your companions, so that you can wash the feet of those that you love. Or Christ's servanthood, Christ's example, is that you would die even for your enemies, even for those who are physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually trying to harm you, that you would give of your life for them. It was messy. It started in a manger. He began to wash feet. He touched the skin of lepers, the sickest of the people walking around at the time. He went to a cross and died a bloody, messy death. He was buried in a borrowed tomb, and when he rose again, chose those who had no status and no standing in the society in which they lived to be the ones to go out and to spread the good news to everybody. It was messy, and from our standards, it's not the plan that we would have put in place, but thank God he did. Because it was because of his messy plan that we can have the hope of getting out of our mess. It was because of his messy plan that we can get out of our mess and we can experience joy. It was because of his messy plan that we can get out of our mess and we can have peace. And it was because of his messy plan that we saw him show us what true, undying love looks like. A love that goes in and reaches in and pulls people, you and I, out of our mess. Without his messy plan, we would be always stuck in our mess. Thank God for that first Christmas and for the messiness that he put into place on that day. God, we thank you for your messy plan. And this morning on Christmas Eve especially, we thank you for that very first Christmas. Amen.